So we'll have a session now on what to foresee future scenarios for migration. So reports on the scenarios from the 3 projects. We'll do, this session is a little bit shorter, 45 minutes, and we'll do 10 minutes per project. Starting with HumMingBird. We have SiIke Goubin online from KU Leuven. So SiIke, please take it away. Floor is yours.
Thank you for the introduction. Let me just share my screen. And I hope that while I'm presenting, the coffee starts to work its magic so that we're also refreshed for these last couple of sessions. Well, sorry that I'm not there in person, couldn't make it. Anyways, without further ado, let's start. Basically, from HumMingBird, to preview a bit my presentation and what I'll be talking about today, we want to address the drawbacks of existing migration scenarios through improved measurements. And maybe a bit in contrast to what is going on with the other projects, is that we are right now just starting our scenario work. So we will, to preview the results or what I will be presenting, we first developed our different work packages and our data innovations, and these will feed into the scenarios that we are planning to develop. But before I talk about results, maybe first let's go back, as I'm the first speaker in this panel about migration scenarios. What do we actually mean with scenarios? What's in a name? And we've been talking a lot about data, improvements of data, different types of migration forecasts and data innovations today. And they are really focused on, and we discussed that a lot, predicting migration flows, describing migration flows and stocks, and making estimations about what migration could be in the future. The problem, and I've heard this a lot also today, is that those types of forecasts and predictions come with inherent uncertainties. And these are somewhat limitations of the current forecasts. A migration scenario, in contrast, actually makes these types of uncertainties and what ifs into its main goal. It's not a plan to predict actual migration, but rather to take a step back and to think about what would happen to migration in the future, to provide a narrative on the potential migration futures of a given region or country. So it's a sort of long-term perspective that is strategic beyond the knowns that we have today. And maybe relevant for HumMingBird and our project is that most of these scenarios have a relatively long time frame, but also not extremely long. So mostly scenarios have a time frame of 10 to 20 years. And they're qualitative. They're based on input from migration experts and policymakers, and they're usually also targeted towards policymakers. So basically, scenarios are potential migration futures stories. You could tell forecasts, sorry if I put it so bluntly over there, but they produce numbers. Also, just in general, the way in which those two have been developed over the years are very different. Scenarios, qualitative data, most of the time, forecasting quantitative data. Now, of course, in HumMingBird, we use both sets of data, and we argue that it's important to have both views, both more quantitative and qualitative, within scenarios to actually make scenarios future-proof. Just maybe also as an historical point of view, the use of scenarios is something that has been a relatively recent development. If you look at it, all the scenarios that have been developed in migration research, you only see that in the last 10 years, in the last decade or so, scenarios have become an important tool to predict migration or to think about migration. And most of the current migration scenarios have been developed, including by us, but in general by policymakers and policy institutes, and they're also usually targeted towards policymakers. And there is hardly any academic literature on those scenarios. Now, in our work package, we one of the things, or in HumMingBird, one of the things we engage ourselves to do, and what we are also right now doing, is making a summary of existing scenarios. And here is where it gets interesting. At least this is what I find interesting. Most migration scenarios basically can be categorized into a sort of matrix structure. All scenarios that I've come across in the literature, or that you come across in the literature, basically at least include an economic growth and convergence dimension. So they either predict that there will be low economic growth and convergence internationally, or rather strong economic growth. On the other hand, all scenarios also take into account the degree of international cooperation and political and social inclusion that exists. Will there be a lack of international cooperation in the future? Will human rights be weakened? Will there be political polarization? Or rather, in contrast, will there be equality, strong cooperation, etc.? And that leads to somewhat, you could call them almost stereotypical images of what a future world could look like. Will there be inclusive growth? There is one report that even calls this type of scenario humming bees on the global meadow, in which all countries will cooperate, and there will be strong economic growth, which will lead to a world that is open to migration, especially economic migration, whereas other types of scenarios predict rather a my country first type of dynamic, for instance, or the rise of technopoly, the rise of global super firms and technology basically dominating the world. So for those not familiar with scenarios, these are this type of storylines that are developed. And they are, while almost all of the existing scenarios are based on this economic growth and international cooperation, political inclusion perspective, they are, there's more meat that can be put to the bones of those different types of stories. And these can range from a host of factors. I've included a couple on the slides here, but basically they all assume the same types of events and then vary the degree to which these events will be under control or not, or positive or not. For instance, environmental changes and extreme weather events, some scenarios will then argue that we will get climate change under control, others do not. All assume that in Europe, our population will be aging. All assume some type of technological change, but will then adapt the way in which that technological change comes with benefits or risks. What is interesting also from a European perspective, I think, is that when you do a systematic review of the literature of scenarios, they all assume that in the future, Europe will become a less attractive migration destination. That migrants outside of the EU will go to other more attractive countries, like China, for instance, or other Asian superpowers. All scenarios also assume to some degree that there will be new stakeholders, like cities, super firms, that will play a bigger role in determining the shape of migration in the future. But as I have only 10 minutes, I will not go more into detail about that. However, there are a couple of challenges with the current scenarios. And I think the one that I find most striking is that they are somewhat stereotypical. Often they are dichotomies. There will be economic growth or there will be no economic growth. There will be a lot of international cooperation or there will be no international cooperation. Climate change will be uncontrolled or we will be able to tackle it. So that leads to a sort of almost Manichaean worldview in which you will either be able to actually make things work or not. So that is one criticism you could give to them. There is no perspective of muddling through. Europe at different speeds type of approach. In most scenarios, I won't say all, but in 90% of them, it's not really taken into account. And of course, the second major criticism of migration scenarios is that they're only as good as the composition of the experts that define them. And very often, this also leads to somewhat Eurocentric views, in which Europeans think and discuss about Europe's migration in the future, but that quickly boils down to or leads into a sender-receiver logic, in which within European migration is often an overlooked aspect, or it is mentioned but not really investigated into detail. And also in which Europe is seen as basically as a receiving country, or country is not the right term, receiving continent, whereas, for instance, the role of that and ascending countries, that is then all the rest of the world, whereas it could also be the opposite. As I already mentioned, often the narratives remain rather opaque. It also depends a bit on the time horizon, but in general, because they're potential stories, or stories about potential futures, scenarios tend to be quite short, not very detailed, not very measurable. And that, of course, is connected to a final point of criticism. That is, this is actually their point. It's not to be very detailed or very precise, it's to think about what could happen if all countries decide to enact Trumpian policies and go my country first in terms of their migration policies, but actually more in terms of their political and societal policies in general. And that is another point you would make about migration scenarios. Most of them are not only about migration, but in general, about more general international and political trends. And maybe before I go to how we will improve them, a last point is you can also see that they're flawed by the present. If you read scenarios that have been developed, let's say in 2010, 11, about 2025, you already see that in a way they're not also very good at predicting what will happen in the future, or more, for instance, those that were written in the aftermath of the economic recession, or in the aftermath of the Syrian refugee crisis. You see these types of elements being very dominant within the scenario elements. So in a way, also when trying to look beyond the present, scenarios might be fit. Now, there are 2 points here that I want to make and that we as HumMingBird want to contribute to. I think first and foremost, how can we go beyond just creating stories? And how can we estimate the probability of the different scenarios that have been developed? Right now, most scenarios are developed in such a way that they start from situation A. We are currently 2023, this is Europe today, and this is Europe in 2035. And then different scenarios are developed along them, often in matrix structure across different dimensions. However, usually scenario studies don't really include any types of probability estimates in terms of how likely each of these different building blocks of these matrices will be, or how we can actually go from the current situation to the different scenarios. What are basically the tipping points? And do we have indicators for those tipping points? And this is where we want to go. So what HumMingBird will do, we will not make new scenarios, but rather we're consolidating the existing ones that are out there in the literature today, including from our project partners, a lot of them. And we want to consolidate them and inform and enrich them on the basis of our data innovations. As I mentioned in the introduction, HumMingBird wants to address the drawbacks of the current migration scenarios through improved measurements and improving measurements of migration, causes of migration, where migrants end up. This is precisely what we have been doing in these last couple of years, and this information we will implement into the existing scenarios. What we will do, we will make content-wise contributions to those scenarios, but also data contributions. Content-wise, there are a lot of points right now that are not included in scenarios, but that are key to migration. such as migration hubs, such as the role of migration networks, looking at shocks and how to potentially predict shocks, looking more into policy effects, media effects. Some migration scenarios that currently exist have some of these elements, but often they are overlooked. And further, we want to develop quantitative and qualitative indicators and integrate those into scenario planning and into the actual scenarios to ensure that scenarios don't just remain stories, but that become measurable stories that can be captured by actual indicators. Also, we should be more open towards alternative information sources to inform migration scenarios. So in a way, what we're saying here is that to us, a perfect scenario shouldn't only be qualitative, but should indicate quantitative and qualitative logics within the scenarios, and really to go and capture how we can go from now into the future. Having said that, we just started, as I said, with our scenario work. So I would say, stay tuned. In 2024, we will be able to show you what we have thought within our final report that we're planning to make. Thanks for the attention.
Thank you so much.
So next up, we have for the FUME project from IIASA, Olaya, Bucaro, and Samir KC, talking about the FUME scenarios. And in case you don't know the two, Orlando goes first.
So I work mostly with we did 3 levels of projections. I can hear myself. We did 3 levels of projections within FUME, the national, regional, and local. And I work mostly with the national, and there's also where the scenario work was. First, quickly about the population projection model for the national, also global level, if you want to call it. We got data from Nordregio for the EU countries by age, sex, education, and also country of birth for all EU countries and the UK. And then the transitions are used from the Wittgenstein Center projection using the SSP2 assumptions. And those are the same by country of birth for the education transitions and also the fertility and mortality. So the model is an extension of the already existing Wittgenstein Center model, which only is by age, sex, and education, if we added the country of birth. And then it was coupled and integrated with the migration model done by Pick, Lucas, replacing the IIASA migration projections. And the output of the projection was the population for the EU countries by age, sex, education, and country of birth, but not for the rest of the world. In total, there was 171 countries of birth in the data. And then we get the migration flows, of course, by origin, destination, and also age, sex, and education attainment and country of birth. So there was 4 or 5 migration scenarios and also no migration, where we did not apply the PIC migration model for comparison. You will see it later in the results. The benchmark scenario is based on the SSP2 GDP, and this is only GDP scenarios based. So there was no change in the rates of the population projection. So we only use SSP2 fertility and mortality rates. So the benchmark does include a COVID shock, but does not include the Ukraine war. Ukraine war is in its own scenario where the IMF estimates are until 2027, and then there's a transition back to the SSP2 growth rates, and this is true for all countries except Ukraine. Then we have a recovery in Europe scenario where the European countries transitions towards the SSP with the highest growth rate, and it can differ between different countries. And the developing countries, including emerging economies, transition towards the SSP with the lowest growth rates. And the rest of other countries that are not in Europe, but not part of developing countries such as the US and Australia, are transitioning towards the SSP2. Yeah, and before in the recovery Europe and also in the rise of the East, it's the same scenario as in the Ukraine war until 2027. And the rise of the East scenario is the opposite of the recovery to Europe. Then the European countries transition towards an SSP with the lowest growth rate, and the opposite is true for the developing countries. Then the last scenario is intensifying global competition, where there is a catch-up in the GDP from the less wealthy countries, where they're to 2040. Yeah, when around 2040, we'll catch up to the GDP levels of the richer countries, and this is inspired by some other scenarios done. And because we have the European countries, the EU countries with country of birth information and the population projection, then the most detailed migration and population projections are within Europe, because we have country of birth both in and outflows of all those countries.
Thank you. Well, I can say that most of our responsibility that we had was to develop the model and then facilitate the input from others. As one of the main input in this global model is the Wittgenstein Center's projections for all the countries of the world by age, sex, and education. We have just recently been finalizing an update. So I think in the next 1-2 months, we will be releasing our new update. So a large part of our preparation was also went in preparing the Wittgenstein Center projections that we have brought in here. And the second thing that we did was to provide this modeling service to do the subnational projections. So basically, NEEDY was preparing Leo van Vissen. He was preparing all the input to the model. So there was a question about how the regional model was done. So it's basically, we have the national model, and for the regional model, Leo has collected the information within each of these countries. So statistics from within each of the country, because we need them in addition to fertility and international migration and all this, we also need the internal migration between the two regions. So this was an additional thing that we had for the internal migration. And we had just finishing all these implementation of all these scenarios also at the subnational level. So basically the results are just coming out, and we have not yet analyzed it. So that's why before showing the results, I will be just showing some results that is coming out, but the analysis of the result is still to be done. And this is the process of scenarios that I mostly work with, the scenarios that sometimes there is kind of iteration. Sometimes we think of some narratives, some scenarios, we go further, but when you look at the result looks very unplausible or very implausible. In that case, we had to come back to the board and work on the narratives as well. So this is a result for, I call it EU 28, which is 27 plus UK. So we have it for 171 countries, the country of birth, but we have put it together. So you can see that the top row is the population in 2015. So we start from 2015. And then the population of the native. So we call it native, like those who are born in the countries. And then the second one are the migrants who are non-EU born migrants. And then this is the final one is the EU born, but not living in the country of birth. And then we have, just to show some results here quickly. So this is a no migration scenario. So if there is no migration, you will see that there will be nobody coming here. So this is how it will look like. And then we have this benchmark scenario, which would look something like this. So this is what the output is coming out. I mean, one thing that I just want to highlight here is that there is lots of this where, well, in the EU structure, you have lots of people with higher level of education, but when you have migrants from other part of the world coming to Europe, there will be people with lower level of education. So the migration input is coming from Lucas, right? So we have implemented that. This is a very bad comparison graphs, but just to show you how things are, like when you look at a single, so all the countries, I'm again apologize for this color. I'm a color blind and I shouldn't be putting those kind of colors like that. I always use the marks, but didn't do it there. But just the idea here is showing that if there is no migration, so in Europe, European countries, this is how it would look like. So a lot of countries will see that population decline. There will be some countries where the population will still be high because of fertility level or the population momentum, that they have larger base population. So it will take some time before they will die. And then we are trying to generate this kind of graphs and, like compare things like when the migration is brought in, what will happen and how much difference does it make? We can look at the structure of the population by country of birth, region of birth, like who would be, whose proportions will be increasing. And while doing this, there was also a question about, those who, so children born to the migrants, where we will put it. But according to our definition, if it is the, birth thing, so we have put it in the like natives, so become natives, but there was also some demand for separating it for some analysis, which can be done as well. And I will very quickly show some results here. These are the results for the whole of EU when we have these different scenarios. Like for example, this is a no migration scenario. So in case of no migration scenario, the population will decline quite rapidly in Europe. So this is until 2050. Well, 30 million less than what would be nice. So I won't say this is a rapid one, but it's a decline. But in lots of other scenarios, we have, we want to capture some kind of a distribution into the future. So again, I don't want to discuss the results, but showing that our model is kind of complete, but with some further analysis of the results, there could be some iterations, a few iterations to be done. And then we also have it for specific countries. So we show these 4 case study countries, like how different scenarios would result in. Denmark and Netherlands have more like the increasing population kind of future, whereas in Italy and Poland, there is a future we see that the migration would go down. And in case of Poland, lots of these different scenarios is not making much difference. And it could be because the migration, the way we have the scenarios, is not impacting Poland, maybe because there are not many. I need to, maybe the Polish colleagues could say that. I'm just trying to imagine. But okay, I will not discuss the results. And these are some graphs that I have, just a visualization of the data from the Eurostat that Northridge you had prepared, like, population for each country, like how the population distribution by age, sex, and education looks like by the birth data, and some, you might see some interesting thing here. I actually, when I was preparing this, I'm a little bit, this is PRT is Portugal, right? So this is not Portugal. I am a little shocked that we have the situation of education. So I actually wanted to check this out because I think it's a European country, and I'm not believing that the education system is like this. But I also saw this graph, and I was actually checking, thinking like in Poland, why are there so many people of, maybe there is some historical reason there, or maybe I did something wrong here. Some non-host, meaning that those who are not born in the EU. I mean, the scale is not so big, so it's like about 20,000, but yeah, these are the things that we need to look at. The data, some other countries. Yeah, so we are at this moment where we have a model for national and subnational ones, and we are now analyzing our results. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Orlando and Samir.
I just got the message that Portugal is correct.
Michaela.
Yes, so the last presentation for this session is then logically, of course, from QuantMig, Michaela Potančoková. I hope I pronounce your name correctly, Michaela, if not.
Absolutely correctly. That was excellent.
Thank you. Good to have you here online. Looking forward to your presentation.
I hope you can see my screen and without any strange things that I can see on my screen, but I hope that's fine. So yes. First of all, hello from Vienna, and thank you very much for having the opportunity to present still the results that we are still wrapping up from the QuantMig. And this was actually excellent work where I am on the receiving side of implementing here a lot of work from other work packages into demographic microsimulation model. And I will briefly talk here about especially impacts on labor force, because this is a great concern to many policymakers with respect to inevitable population aging in European societies, and what can possibly change in case of what we call high immigration events, which is our more neutral wording for the migration shocks. So we use demographic simulations. Is it working? Great. And first, I will just tell you, like, not try to communicate in nutshell. It's like impossible in 10 minutes to explain on this work. What we do and why we're using microsimulations. So first of all, we are simulating simultaneously populations of 31 European countries as one system into future. And the great advantage that we have in microsimulation is that we can consider many dimensions of heterogeneity, because we know that our societies are changing also very much through migration. They're becoming more diverse, and the policymakers are very much interested in the impacts this would have in the short term, in the midterm, and in the long term. And as demographers, we're generally looking into more distant futures to outline kind of trajectories of future population developments under certain assumptions, because this is very crucial to estimate future challenges that stem from the economic development or migration, as it became one of the key drivers of population change in most European countries. Since we're interested in modeling of potential of future labor force, we need to account a bit more dimensions than Samir talked about, and that this is much more feasible in a microsimulation model. So we are taking account all these dimensions Samir talked about before: age, gender, educational attainment, place of birth, in our case it is native born or those born in different world regions, labor force participation, migrant status, duration of stay is extremely important, but unfortunately we have very few kind of longitudinal life course indicators of migration, such as retention rates also, which would be super to implement the microsimulation, but these data simply don't exist. Another great advantage of microsimulation is that we can model the European migration system simultaneously. And this is very important because we know that it behaves differently. There is freedom of movement, of course, so especially European nationals. We can also see that actually in the rates that we have prepared for this work are much more mobile than others, other non-EU migrants, for example. So the relevance, of course, great interest in the impacts of long-term demographic change and population aging on future labor force. And we kind of benchmark on this, on the baseline scenario, which is kind of standard, usual, business as usual trend projection scenario. What would happen if some unforeseen or unforeseeable, I would say, migration events happen? And this is inspired a lot from what Jakub was already talking about how to handle uncertainty and how to handle the shocks. Like, especially when we look into migration, is extremely difficult to forecast, is impossible to predict in the long run. And this is, I think, has to be very clearly communicated also to the policymakers that it's impossible to expect exact numbers, especially if you look into long-term time horizons. But what we can do is to simulate certain scenarios to show these potential impacts, and also to show what we can be realistic about as migration, what migration outcomes can be for the societies. We have seen in the past the so-called refugee crisis. We have seen now Ukrainian unprecedented migration. These events are impossible to predict ahead of time, like year 2, 3 now. So we don't know when they would happen. I believe that this is like really unpredictable. Of course, we can sense something and do now casting if there are some triggers, if some drivers are triggered, and we already can sense some information. But this is impossible in long-term projections. And we were discussing a lot actually between different work packages in QuantMig and also with our advisory board, how to approach this, how to handle this for these long-term futures. And what we actually then decided to do instead of developing narratives is to go with completely model-based scenarios of migration shocks that would be, so imagine that 5 years from now, another migration wave would come to Europe. What would it mean against the benchmark of kind of standard baseline scenario? What would change? And this is what I will talk about very briefly in the next slides. Because to predict this kind of wave, we would have to know its timing, which is extremely uncertain. We cannot do that, really. We would have to know its magnitude. Well, there actually Jakub and Peter developed some very useful tools how to try to at least estimate from the past time series statistical distributions, heavy tail distributions, where we can take some percentiles from the extremes of these distributions and use them as potential volumes of such shocks. We would have to know the duration of these events. So what we decided to simulate is to simulate that event happens as a one-off event, so in 1 year, or has certain persistence, because we know that once people start coming, maybe the crisis takes longer, more are to come through family reunifications and through established migration networks. So there's some persistence often. So we developed this different set of scenarios, and also we would need to also know for the shock where this crisis would happen. Where from would these people come? And this is, of course, also extremely uncertain. So we decided to sequentially model these kind of events from different world regions. Now, we use world regions because we are quite limited with LFS data. So we cannot use individual countries of origin. it's kind of a prize for being able to do something about forecasting of labor force participation. So what do we take into account in our microsimulation? It's a demographic projection model done through microsimulation. We take into account the important differentials in demographic behaviors and also in migration and also in labor force participation. We borrow here a lot from the work that Samir has been doing, and we are doing in Wittgenstein Center on the Wittgenstein projections. So, for example, the impacts of COVID on mortality and fertility trends. We borrow from the new SSP2 projection of the Wittgenstein Center. And also we have tried in like operationalizing these kind of scenarios to take into account some most important theoretical propositions. So for example, when we are talking about inflow of immigrants into the EU from different countries, we need to somehow model into which destinations these people would arrive to. And we do this through the established migration corridors. And we have also heard a lot in the morning about the key role of networks. So when we are then kind of modeling the shock from a certain region, these people disperse into our 31 European countries according to these established corridors based on what we know from the past migration flow data. What was very important for us to capture in the model were the differentials in especially emigration rates by country of birth. Why? Because we are trying to model also diversity of European populations in terms of the origin. So the immigrants, native-born populations, and those who come from different world regions or the non-EU populations, to look into future, how this diversity would be increasing over time. And we know that these populations differ in their propensity to move. So taking the estimated flows from the work package 6 from Jakub and Peter, we have merged these with the zero migration estimates of SSP2 scenario and collected additional, no, this is for the baseline. So we collected actually additional data where they existed on migration, not only by country of birth and destination, but also from the origins and according to different countries of birth, which are not to different destinations, so non-EU or EU, because we need to know also whether these people stay moving within our European system, within our model, or they exit the EU, right? So we made this kind of estimates, and I think what came out of it, although there was a lot of assumptions based behind this, because actually empirical data we managed to collect only from about 5 countries, was that we could estimate that that you can see these differentials, that the native born, actually the least mobile, only about 2 in 100 would move. And we can also see that those who are native born in Eastern European countries have sometimes triple or quadruple rate, which makes sense since we are looking at the post-accession rates during the past decade. And the most mobile seem to be the EU-born people, so people who were born from other EU country than they resided it, and they had much more higher emigration rates. So we then, why this is so important in our model, because like we apply these emigration rates, also we make assumptions on them to the population stocks to obtain immigrants, and then in the model we have parameters determining based on the OD matrices that again come from the previous work packages, who stays in the EU and who leaves the model, and to which EU country these people would move. And in this way, we actually in somewhat capture what also Helga was talking about, the onward migration of the foreigners, within the EU, kind of indirectly. And then we have to, of course, make assumptions about immigration from the rest of the world regions, right? Because this European system of migration is running through this immigration rate. So immigrants from some countries become immigrants in the others. And we make then scenarios of specifically this immigration from the other world regions. In the baseline scenario, we took very conservative, classic IIASA approach of again, estimating emigration rates from given world region into the EU in the past. And we keep these rates fixed in the future. What we actually achieve with this is that we estimate not only volume, not the flow from certain region into the EU plus countries, but also we observe changes in the composition of this flow, of this overall flow, because basically this kind of operationalization of the scenario reflects that what we know from also theory and migration theory, that regions which have higher number of young people who are more mobile and regions that are developing would be sending more migrants probably in future compared to those that are demographically aging, because they are smaller cohorts of young people who are prone to move, and to migrants from economically developed regions. And you can see this a bit on this messy chart that I created just today over the lunch break, that when we look at this baseline flow from all EU, from all the world regions into the EU plus countries, we have declining flow from East Asia or other Europe, but increasing flows from sub-Saharan Africa, for example. And yeah, then these migrants are pulled into the destinations by the established corridors. So when we look into some results of when we plug these all parameters into the projection, what comes out? So when we look at projected working age population, of course, there is great diversity of what would happen in different European countries. Overall, most countries can expect declines, and in many cases, such as in case of Italy, and these are relative index numbers compared to 2020 working age population sizes, Italy would experience quite strong shrinkage of the working age population, while UK probably would not see much shrinkage happening. But of course, working age population is not labor force, and this is what concerns policymakers more. So when we account for the trends for all these differentials in labor force participation rates, and also for the cohort trend, because we know that female labor force participation is increasing, and younger women are more prone to participate in the labor market than let's say, generation of their mothers. And we also take into account all the existing differentials between different groups of migrants compared to natives, for example, and how these trajectories change with the duration of stay. We see actually that the projected labor force decline also because of educational expansion that we are also modeling, but I have no time to go into details here. That this doesn't really mean necessarily shrinkage of labor force in some of the European countries, and much smaller shrinkage of labor force compared to what we would see for working age population. So this is kind of very positive news for the policymakers that the future may not be as bleak when we actually take into account more heterogeneities than if you look into standard population projection, let's say, as those produced by Eurostat, where only age and sex dimensions are taken into account. Now, coming to shocks. So against these results from the baseline scenario, what we do is we take these magnitudes of shocks from different, we take 7 world regions, and apply them as an annual shock. Now, like, imagine if 5 years from now, another migration crisis happens. Now, we don't know where it would happen, so we sequentially let it happen in each of these world regions, and it lasts for 1 year, or it's persistent migration from that world region at higher volume for about a decade because of family reunifications and establish new networks and new opportunities that these kind of events often open. We apply this as kind of a surplus migration to the baseline scenario. To illustrate this, I think like Jakob would be able to explain much more about the theory behind why taking the 90th percentile of Pareto distribution would be roughly corresponding to twice in a century frequency of occurrence of such an event. What I can show you to kind of imagine what we are doing is that in this first line, in the first line, you can see the gross inflow of immigrants into the EU plus countries in different time periods that we are modeling. And then what would be the surplus flows if this kind of high immigration event depends from different world region, other Europe, Sub-Saharan Africa, etc. And this is illustration of the flows that we would obtain if this is a persistent event. So in about 5 years from now, so about 2027. And what would change in terms of demographic trends or labor force, in this case, labor force size changes? How much can these shocks kind of change the general trend? Well, actually not so much. Although these numbers may seem pretty high to many policymakers, the relative impact is not so huge. And this impact we observe only from those world regions where there already is kind of established corridor or established diaspora. And only mostly in these destinations, and only if this is a persistent shock. So if I look into 1 year or annual shocks, basically all results are within the random noise of the model. So there is no long-term impact of this kind of high event. So if 1 million of Sub-Saharan Africans arrives and they have different characteristics, they have different labor force participation, etc., it still does mean very little for a long-term future. Now, if this shock is persistent, as you can see, for example, for Germany, the pink line is the baseline scenario. The reduction in the decline of the labor force would be a little slower, and the total labor force would be about, I think this is about 3 percentage points larger than in baseline scenario. And this only, but we get these more significant impacts only if this high immigration event happen in West Asia and in other Europe, because this is very likely migrants from these regions would be destined a lot to Germany, but we don't get the same impacts of that scenario, for example, for Italy or for France, where again, I show these lines in gray because the differences to baseline are simply very small. This is really at the edge of any impact at all, taking into account the random noise. And in the UK, we can see that if a large persistent immigration event occurred from the South and Southeast Asia, this would top up again the labor force by about, I think this is about 2 percentage points, but it's very, very small impact. So what actually matters in future is when we are also forecasting, is to try to come up with some kind of plausible main scenario, right? The shocks can mean something in different contexts, especially in the countries which already host diaspora from that country, but cannot dramatically change this kind of trajectories of future change in population sizes or working age population or labor force. So in a way, immigration is not the panacea for this kind of policy targets. Now, these flows were maybe not too high. There are several million people every 5 years, let's say, but these are still very small flows. And we have actually showed in our previous work in the SEPAM project that this is really not new message, that the immigration would have to be high and sustained to slow down this a bit to have at least some impact on population aging or labor force decline, or to stabilize labor force dependency ratios. I didn't show labor force dependency ratios, for example, because there is no impact whatsoever from the scenarios that from this shock scenario. So basically, they cannot offset this main trend even at these numbers that we are projecting. And also, I would say that yes, migration is important. It would be very important for shaping future of European countries. But if the policymakers are looking for policies to address decline in the labor force, these policies are elsewhere, and we have showed it in the past by showing how selective migration at very high volumes, especially selected migration of highly educated, or improved labor force integration of migrants, or activation of especially women on the labor market, and here we talk also about migrant women, would be much more impactful policy to look at when we talk about future labor force. And Michaela, I think I talked too long.
Yes, we have to.
This is my last slide.
Yes, thank you so much, and big applause to you. Just for everyone here, I'll give an information that we have to join both sessions now and move on. And we invite now Daniela from QuantMig to present actually what one of the uses could be from the projections. And
we'll take the Q&A together for the two sessions afterwards. So if you have a question, keep it in mind. There will still be an opportunity to ask later. But Daniela, who's presenting now, has to leave in a bit. So we wanted to catch that.
Welcome.
Thank you so much, Vaida, and thank you so much for adjusting the agenda. I have to leave in 15 minutes, but Jakub will be here until the end, and he will reply to the questions related to my presentation. Perhaps I can share my screen. Okay. So here we go. Can you see well?
Very well.
Okay. So it's very nice that I'm talking just after Michaela, because her work is the base for what I'm going to present now. At QuantMig project, we had 3 different deliverables that are target to to general audience, so non-experts in this field, with different degrees of adaptability. So we'll have a simulation tool that's target more to professionals based on Michaela's simulation models. And this is work in progress and will be available at the QuantMig website soon. Then we have a set of teaching materials that includes a quiz that is part of this. And the whole idea that we had with this, what I'm going to present here is the interactive quiz and the teaching materials. So the big challenge of this deliverable for us was how to make the complex world of simulations easy to understand and somehow invite students and the general audience to explore this further. No? So as I said, this deliverable was targeted to non-scientific audience, in particular to younger people at secondary schools, so people who are finalizing secondary schools, but also first-year university students. We tested with both, and for both audience, it's quite exciting. And this, so as I said, the quiz allows users to play with QuantMig simulations on the future trends and to understand basic patterns of population change through migration, basically the size and the age distribution, while the teaching materials go deeper and is formed by 5 different units that I'm going to present to you in a couple of minutes. Both of these deliverables, they were created in a way that it's easy, accessible, and entertaining. And we have, of course, tested in schools and also outside schools, as the materials, they are developed for both for teachers use and also for self-teach, as individuals can go through on their own. So what's the goal and what we offer through these deliverables? So the idea that we had after doing our research on what's already there, because there are a lot of teaching materials on migration at different levels. But what we wanted to do is to really focus on uncertainty around migration and how to approach it. We use lots of mathematics. It's also very like teachers on math teachers at schools, they can use these materials, and they were very happy to test this for us. But it can also be used in different subjects. And what we also want to do is to frame uncertainty around future trends as a natural part of social science, so that students can learn how to think about uncertainty. So with these deliverables, they were a real teamwork in this consortium, and we have had lots of discussion about words, about how to present things in a straightforward, things that are very complex in the simplest way possible. So if I can say something as a coordinator of these deliverables, is that we really thought about words in here and how to present this in the best way possible so people can understand. So we adjust, of course, many ways that after doing tests, after doing rounds with teachers. So it's very, I would say, very solid in this way. And everything that is in these deliverables, they are based on QuantMig reports and more technical deliverables. So here I show you at the end, it doesn't look like that, but this was, I mean, it looks pretty much like that, but this was a first example that the company sent us. So this is how the quiz looks like. So we are inviting people to test their knowledge and ask them very easy questions. And through these questions, we approach the uncertainty that's around migration with words that we think they are adequate. So here I put you example. So tell me, where do you live? What do you think was the percentage of foreign-born people living in this country in 2020? And then the answer is never right or wrong, but we say good if the person, the reply is the correct one, or alternatively we say we estimate it is the 40%, for example. So, and afterwards, what is your best guess on how things may change in 2050? And then the answer is interesting. Our guess, based on our scientific work is that this percentage will increase or will decrease or will no change in the future. So it's basically no right or wrong, and this will be the opening for the school materials. It's still work in progress. It's not in our website yet, but this will be placed on the top of the school materials so people can start there, right? So and then we move to the school materials, which are, as I mentioned, divided in 5 different parts. So we have the migration and migration uncertainty. We have micro level decision making. We have macro level drivers. We have a section on natives' perception of migrants, and the final one is on migration policy. I'll quickly I'll close my presentation or click here in the link. Let's see if, yes, it works. So we can see in our website, if you go to our website, these materials, they are located here under project outputs, teaching materials. So we can explore slowly as if you are interested in that, how
Daniela, we only
yes.
see your PowerPoint.
Oh, so I have to close the PowerPoint. Sorry, I'll stop sharing and share again. Can you see it now?
Looks like.
Yeah, okay. So this, just to show you again, it's under project outputs and then teaching materials. And the quiz is still not there. As I said, it's work in progress, but it will be here very soon in the next 15, 20 days, I guess. So here you can see that it's divided into the lessons, but it's very, very user-friendly. So we have created a workbook and a teaching guide that comprise all these 5 sections. And for each lesson, we have on slides that are hosted. Can you see here the Prezi slides?
Yes.
So if you click there on under slides, you can immediately see the presentation here. So teachers, they don't have to download anything or prepare anything in advance. It's just clicking here on under slides, you go here, and then you see the presentation. So it's like, what's migration uncertainty, and then first question, like a brainstorm in the classroom or for yourself, what comes to your mind when you think about migration. And then is the definition, and then we have what's the percentage of migrants in different countries, and then we have questions on who, just an introduction, but then we get into the question, what's migration uncertainty? And here is you see, like this kind of work, it sounds very simple, but we have lost lots of time. We have spent lots of time to create this simple definition here, so it's easily digestible. And then the types of migration uncertainty and so on. So what might cause migration uncertainty? And then people can reflect on that. Shock events and the impact of migrations, more reflection questions, and then we go on predicting future migration. And we start with that. We are pretty bad at predicting future migration. So people don't think it's a straightforward answer. No, so what do we need? You need many things, and it's not easy, it's complex. And then we go on the data part of it, and then we go on Eurostat database, and then we play with data a bit. So this is the structure for all the lessons. We have a workbook. As I said, the workbook, it's for students, and you have everything here for all the sessions. So we can, this is for the first part. So we have the space for the students to calculate things, but then you go to the second, third sections, and then you have the teaching guide, teacher's guide, which also have instructions on how to use everything. So that's it, what I wanted to share. It's very little time to really explore everything, but I hope I got your interest in going to our website whenever you have time and really exploring these and testing if you have a chance with young people and sharing with your networks. Thank you so much. And I'm sorry I have to leave now, really.
Thank you, Daniela. Super. So next in line is actually to show some kind of also practical application of forecasts is Marcin from FUME.
Hello, can you hear me well?
Very well, we can see you and hear you. Yes.
Yes, I will try to share my screen. PowerPoint. Share. Yeah, can you see well?
Perfect.
Yeah, great. So, yeah, it's a hard task for me because we saw very nice materials that our colleagues from QuantMig prepared, and they have the target group very well defined. I would like to show from our perspective, our project perspective, what can be useful and what we found during these 3.5 years, what are the challenges and use of our potential use of our approach. So as you heard during this entire day, what from my colleagues from the project, that we have this approach of three level projections, that we start with national level with many different variables, including not only age and sex, but also the education and country of birth. Then we have the regional models that can give us information about distribution and changes because of migration in different regions of the countries. But we have as well the local projections. Local means that we zoom to the cities, and why we are doing this and what could be the target group for this work. So at our project, I'm not showing right now all our objectives of the project, but some of them that I think are quite important in this. So we want to deliver or create some kind of tool that can be useful for the city planning related to migration processes. From our discussions and in our project, the kind of not consortium partners, but the institution that collaborate with us are 4 cities. So it's Amsterdam, so city or municipality, local government in Amsterdam and in Copenhagen and Krakow and Rome. So they were from the beginning, or even before, at the stage of writing the proposal, they were involved in the project, and we had many discussions with them about the kind of challenges related to projections and what kind of projections are done, what kind of data are used in decision making and planning. And this is like very big discrepancy or variation between the cities. But generally, everywhere there is potential for improvement, even in the cities that, let's say, that are in our group the best. So Amsterdam, in Copenhagen, still there is the need, for example, for projections on the local level, but not local for the city, because all these 4 cities have projections on the level of the whole city or municipality, but as well, and then some have district level analysis and as well projections. But if we want to zoom deeper into some specific neighborhoods, then it becomes challenging. And then additional thing is that the municipalities or policy makers they would like to know what can happen in the future in these neighborhoods, with, for example, if we take into consideration some development of the city, some parts, what kind of prices there will be for example, for renting, for buying apartments, all of this, and how this can actually relates and can be as well the migration. If we know, for example, what kind of migration will be on the level of the country and some region, so how this will impact city and also the different places in the city, and this is quite important. That we also have to actually, it's written in the slide that everything has a location, including everyone and immigrants as well. So they are in specific place. So our approach is to do the projections on the grid cell level 100 by 100 meters. And there's also the importance to share experience, and we found as well in these discussions that it's important, you know, to share knowledge that we create, but to also listen to the needs of the municipalities. And as well, what we would like to achieve, and we didn't still, is to kind of facilitate the knowledge transfer between cities, so good practices. So the only right now was that we, for example, discussed with the city of Copenhagen, and then we discussed with, for example, in the city of Krakow, and then we told them, okay, these kind of things can be done, and they were very interested in this and all of this. But it would be good as well to kind of join forces, or there are this collaboration between cities, but these topics, I think they are not there. So kind of what kind of better projections we can do, and what kind of better data we can collect, and as well how to use them in decision making on the local level. So as I said, we focus on these four cities, and you heard about the projections on different levels in the project. So you can see that actually we have the big variation between the places, not only in the size of population, let's say that, but even if we have the two cities with more or less the same population size, then, for example, there is different density and the size of the cities as well. You can see that, for example, it's 7,500 inhabited cells in Amsterdam, and 21,500 grids of 100 by 100 meters in Copenhagen. So there is also kind of challenge, spatial challenge in the planning, how if the migrants comes, or new waves of migrants come. And what we did is, there were many challenges, and maybe this is not like exactly a session about the challenges, but during this process, we found the problem is, for example, with definition of the city, and what is actually the area that we want to study, and what is important, for example, from perspective of migration, and what actually decision makers, policy makers in the cities, planners would like to have, or what kind of area they are interested in. Then of course there was a challenge of preparation of data, so aggregation to the grid cells, and for some, like from Amsterdam and Copenhagen, it was not the big problem, because, for example, geodata are stored and in the registers, so it was the matter just recalculation. But in Krakow and Rome, this is not the case. So there were a lot of work in our team to actually prepare this, or use direct, indirect methods of preparation of this data. Then there was the process that was done by our colleagues in Aalborg University, so machine learning, and then the spatial projection. So we are able to project population given the size of new flow of migration. We can project on the map, on the grid cells, the future allocation of population, including different groups of migration. So this is the kind of big possibility, and then big from one side, that big challenge, but also the opportunity that it can be more like mainstream for planning of the cities. And as well from the perspective of statistics Denmark, we are actually, because of the project like FUME and other previous projects that we were involved in regarding to this kind of approach, we are working on some products that are actually take the spatial elements, spatial variables into account, so we can actually help researchers and also policymakers in finding good data for their purposes. And shortly, because I think it's not about the presentation of data, but you can see how big the discrepancy is or difference between the share of migrants. And I would like to focus on Krakow, that as you can see in 2000, there was almost no migrants in Krakow, but this increased a lot during this period. And we were able, first time, I think this is the first reconstruction of the changes in migration in the city of Krakow. No one did it, and as well in Poland, we don't have there is no such a data. So this is already the big improvement. And as well, we have not only this, but we have also the projections of different groups. So we can see the change in the map of the city. And similarly, we have these estimates for different groups, for example, from MENAP countries in Copenhagen and non-EU immigrants in Rome as well. We can see the historical data, how this changes over time. The same with specific groups. So it's as well something that we can deliver to policymakers. So they are interested, for example, in some specific groups, because of our approach from perspective of country of birth, we can actually deliver the specific information about the specific groups. And this is an example of our projections. We are still working on different scenarios, and here we have the situation in Krakow in 2020 with 760,000 people and with 30.7 thousand immigrants from non-EU, because this is especially for non-EU immigrants, so it's 4%. But what actually projections shows is that population of Poland will dramatically decrease in the period, and also there is an impact on Krakow that the city is smaller, and then in the benchmark scenario that, for example, Samir before presented, we have the impact as well in Krakow. And the question is if really it should be like this, or cities, the big cities, will have different trajectories or than, for example, regions and the countries, right? So that's the big as well question for discussion.
Martin,
yes,
we have to move on.
Yes. So then we have this kind of scenario. So for example, here we have EU recovery as well, and I think I will finish with this. That I think we have a good potential for development and to helping local governments to not only to collect better data on kind of past data or current data, but as well to have some tools for projections that can help in planning. Thank you.
Thank you super much. And final, the most weighted presentation, this one.
I have good news. It's a very short one.
Great.
It's a very short one, and I'm not going to talk. I mean, we listened to amazing. Do I need to keep that one? It's okay. So I think we listened to amazing work. You know, like what you could do really precisely. You know, like on micro level or on a higher level or with people. But I'd like to raise your attention towards more linking what we've been talking today to tomorrow. Okay. So as researchers, we can do a lot of things intellectually with the projections, with the new data, with the methods and everything we do. But we do know that these 3 sister projects are funded by the Commission, and we are expected to contribute to some specific outcomes, which have a lot to do with migration policy, understanding the patterns and the projections. So we heard amazing examples of potential users. Why don't we have a little bit more questions about the concerns? Okay. So when we consider future migration trends, we can talk about a lot of things, but based on what we discussed today as well, we are in fact talking about early warning systems that have been discussed a lot. And here we can use both quantitative and qualitative approaches. We discuss about forecasting, predictive models. This is mostly quantitative, and we more and more see that it's not only about having more data for models, we also use new methods like the machine learning, so to make the process and the analysis better. And of course, we have the foresights, which are scenarios mostly based on qualitative insights, but we also saw that, you know, in the previous session, that you can also go for micro simulations for different scenarios. I think what we have to keep in mind is that we can do a lot with the existing data. We can address what is lacking, why we should contribute more, but it is about how are we going to use such information. So the question is simple. So what? We know it, and what are we going to do with those? And as many of you, I hope, are very familiar with, the new Pact on Migration and Asylum is in fact not a brand new one. It's building on the previous reform proposals. And I think the bold part is very important because it really puts a lot of emphasis on the aspects relating to the screening and registration of migrants arriving at the EU's external borders. So we should, well, whatever we do today, what we're talking, like when we get out of the scientific context, we also should realize the potential areas that it could be used. And when we talk about the external migration or the external borders, in fact, it is not only about the castle of Europe. We are really talking about roughly, you know, like the water borders, I mean, sea borders and the regular borders. So we are big, and we are considering a lot about the flows, the directions, where people are coming from, through which channels and the routes. And of course, this is really important, as well as the population stocks in those areas. However, there are 2 specific points of the pact that I'd like to discuss today. The first one is the quota mechanism. What it is all about is having a flexible relocation quotas among countries, so that based on the estimate of number of migrants as well as the labor market needs, so countries can in a way host more or less migrants. And we do know that some countries are not very happy about it, like Hungary and Poland, but you know, like negotiations are going on. But it is really about, I don't like the term, but it is being used literally, sharing the burden. So I think it's important to think the political context, you know, like that, in fact, although we are talking about these more negative perceptions, pact is also about helping migrants have a safer and more regular routes to Europe, in other words, when their human rights are particularly complied with. So the first country for the asylum has really remained one of the criteria still for deciding, but the Migration and Asylum Pact in general is talking a lot about the labor market needs and irregular migration. So there's a huge emphasis on irregular migration and a little bit on talent. And the second part that I will talk is the security concerns. And it's important to consider that the security concerns reflected or addressed in the pact is from the Europe's perspective. So what are the security threats for Europe? So it is talking about different Schengen systems like the Schengen information system, the Eurodac, and you can even link to IIASA. So it's really important about the external borders. So today we talk that, like we don't know that much what's really going on within Europe. In a way, it is also because, like we are more interested on the political level, what's going on out of Europe and to Europe. So I think it's also fair to ask, what about the security concerns of people? These people who are on the route, looking for safer places to live, or better lives, or just for the aspirations that they do have. So the security is not owned by a specific entity or institution. I think it's a broader concept that we have to consider. So I'll wrap up with a very well-known phrase, evidence-based policymaking. We do trust in evidence-based policymaking because we believe that it has better roots and it is more structured. But I have to remind you that we collect data based on policies. Policy defines what type of data we need, how to collect, when to collect, and how to analyze that. And using that data, we are contributing to evidence-based or data-driven policies, which becomes in a way vicious circle or a chicken egg problem, because we are talking about the gaps in existing data, but we have to remember that the policies define what type of data we're going to gather. It doesn't need to be on EU level. To give you an example, very basically, sex segregated data is not available for the UK, for Croatia, for Germany, just because of the national policies not allowing to share such data, not because they do not exist. So I think we can end the day and the discussions with two particular questions. We need better data. We all agree that we would like to have better models. We'd like to have better scenarios and better projections, but two questions arise. For whom? Okay, so on one hand, there are some critiques about, oh, our research, is it going to be an arm for predictive migration policies or institutes? But on the other hand, as researchers, we have to acknowledge that we have an intellectual debt that we owe to migrant communities and future migrants. I mean, I do believe that more than half of the audience here are migrants or with migrant backgrounds or experienced migration. So I think it is really here and all around. And by whom? I think we all saw that for even the projections, even if you adopt a single methodology, either qualitative or quantitative, we see that we need interdisciplinarity because it's so complex. It's getting even more complex. So we need different theoretical perspectives, different disciplinary contributions. And I think mixed methods have been underlined today several times that, you know, we can cover specific dimensions very in depth, but we still need some extra information from other perspectives. So mixed methods can really help to have that we make use of the projections in benefit of human beings in general. And I would like to end up with the discussions around big data, AI, and the machine learning methods. We do know that the computational social science is on rise, and there is no way to escape. It's going to get better. The big data will be there. There will be more complex methods. And I think as social scientists, maybe we should do more to make computational social science more social, because we need questions. Computer scientists, data scientists, they do need questions. It's not about starting from the data, seeing what is there. It's about how can we use these tools, these data, these models to answer the questions that we have to answer. So that's all I will say. I'm leaving you with those two questions particularly, and thanks a lot for listening.
Thank you, but don't run away because we'll have also a conversation still for a couple of minutes. We have with us Anne Singleton and also Carsten, who was moderating or intending to moderate the previous session. So I would like you two to first share your feedback or reflections, what you have heard, and then if there are any questions, please stay. Who can stay with us? And we then move to dinner part and more discussions and so on. But thanks a lot to Bapana.
I just say a few words? Yes, thank you very much. I'll just say a few words. I found all those presentations very interesting. And what struck me is that we're talking about an educational process, the sharing of knowledge and exchange of knowledge, as well as exchanging data and understanding what is meant by data and how to use data. Such an important part of all the process, not just doing the work with our eyes down to work out how to solve all the problems. And I think tomorrow is a very important day for communicating with policymakers, and that means listening to them, listening to what they say and what they don't say, and intervening and saying perhaps what they might be thinking about that is coming through in the evidence. And one of the things that surprised me, I'll just throw in a little comment from the UK. Since Brexit and since all the changes in our migration regime, what surprised recently economists in the UK and surprised me is that there's more diversity in the countries of origin of the people who are resident in the UK than there was before Brexit. So this is interesting things that not necessarily were going to come out of any kind of scenario projections, but sharing that information, sharing that knowledge is very important. And the policymakers' input into scenarios and projections is very important as well. So I often think that policymakers expect a standard of transparency from researchers that they're not willing to offer to us when they know what they're planning to do, and then ask us to do scenarios and projections. But we need to know some of the crucial evidence about what is being planned down the line for the policies in order to get these scenarios in some way in a really realistic ballpark. Thank you.
Yes, I would also like to thank all the presenters of the whole day. I think this was, even though it's been long, admittedly, I think there have been some really interesting discussions, and also seeing all these results combined now and the similarities and differences between the projects was really interesting for me. Maybe one observation on the session of the scenarios, also in relation to our half day at the Parliament tomorrow. My understanding of the scenarios has always been that it's been said several times today, we can't predict the future, right? So most likely none of the scenarios that we come up with here will become reality. So my understanding of them has always been that you should use them in combination to show the range of possible futures. And of course, you could then say what Rainer said this morning, well, then you can just pick the future that you want to prepare for. But the scenarios that he showed were very simplistic, right? So he said continued migration trends, doubled, quadrupled. That's very simplistic. So I guess what we need is we need to argue why the scenarios that we come up with are realistic. And I think Arek and Dilek have done some great work that we haven't seen today about the methodology, about creating new scenarios. So show that they are realistic and that they really span a range of possible futures that we should be more or less prepared for. I think that's what we can pitch tomorrow. One other thought came up. I was wondering a little bit in how far existing scenarios limit our thinking about what's possible in the future. We have seen a lot of references to the SSPs today. Also in FUME, we're making these connections and comparisons. I don't have the answer to that, but I've just been wondering to what extent existing scenarios, because we know them, they limit our thinking about what could be possible in the future. For example, in the terms of limits of economic growth, we know that there are limits in our scenarios. That's not really an option, right? So just as food for thought, maybe. Were there any questions for any of the presenters of these last two sessions?
Yeah, we'll have Martin, Jakub on board. We have Samir, Dilek, and Arek, and Lucas. So yes, you were in previous session, yes. But yeah, if you have any questions, we could take. Do you have any questions to the speakers? Great.
I don't want this question to sound as a naughty question, but what struck me today was that many times the topic came up that we need to think hard about how to translate the outputs of this research towards policymakers. We need to think hard about, referring to what Anne's mentioning, politically down the line. But I also got the sense that we haven't really thought about, we haven't have those answers to those fundamental questions and ethical questions yet. At the same time, tomorrow we're going to the European Parliament and we're going to share outcomes of the research. Are we going to decide tonight on what we're going to say and how to frame the outcomes of the discussions and the projects? Or are we just going to, and here I'm referring to a remark made by Edith a couple of weeks ago, are we going to freewheel? Is there going to be a political message behind the findings that we will share tomorrow? And is it going to be a coordinated political message? Is it going to be clear what we're going to be asking and not just presenting?
I mean, I personally think that's a very good suggestion. And even if it was just 2 or 3 bullet points of agreed points of concern and priorities around the ethics of the process of doing research on EU policies, the data collection issues, all the ethical issues around policy development and the way in which academic networks should engage with policymakers, and perhaps to put some demands down and say that, yes, we'll continue to collaborate with you, but you need to listen to us and you need to be more transparent about what's happening, because this isn't an apolitical process that's happening.
But on the other hand, I think tomorrow is not a lobbying event. It's more about really sitting together, because so many EU projects have been going on, a lot of enormous research outputs, and most of them are either, like staying where they are, and it's very difficult to really assess the impact, like if they are translated into something. And we do know that also the policymakers are from very different backgrounds, very different perspectives. So the idea of the policy day, if you're asking that, was really dialogue, like let's talk, because we will tell what we have done, and it's also like question each other. Let's say, okay, but why do you need this data, or why do you need this? What are you going to with it? And then they can ask some questions to us. So I think it's already a huge step. I don't say that it's sufficient, but I think it's already a huge step, because I don't believe that, even at least for the HumMingBird project, from the partners that I know, it's really difficult to come to a consensus. Like, okay, because the objectives are scientific. Okay, so we want to contribute into policymaking, but it has scientific objectives. And I think most people agree on that, but not everyone has experience in translating, or I don't know, okay, but what is it going to be with that? So I do see your point, and I think priorities can be set, but the idea was really creating the atmosphere or the environment where we can really ask each other. Because I think even us having the opportunity to ask questions directly to them is a step up, at least from what we have done so far in many EU projects. But about the concerns, yeah, I can talk on my behalf, not on the project. It's very tricky, because personally, I don't think that the unethical issues that we discuss are about data or models. It's about how they are used. And it's not about how we use it. We question how politicians will use it. So in fact, the ethical concern is about the politics of migration rather than the methods. I think Eric wants to say something. No, okay. Yeah. No, that's all. I mean, that's more or less what I think. But I guess, as I say, I mean, tomorrow it will be open, really. That's why it's discussion. It's not really, we have long presentations just to let them know how great our scientific work was.
Thank you. I agree. I fully agree with what you said, and I really like the circle of data-driven policies and data and policy-driven data collection. It's just there's an aspect that there's an assumption that the policies are evidence-based, but the issue is that for some policies are not evidence-based; they're based on emotions, and that's the tricky bit. So I would say, and you mentioned the we produce methods, we produce data, and somebody will be using them to produce policies. I would see it as a co-production. Let's talk to the policymakers so that we can co-produce these policies together rather than produce something that they will decide whether to use it because it fits some agendas. Thank you. Sorry, I don't know who was the first one.
Sorry. No, I actually have a very plain question. Are you thinking about any joint dissemination output at the end? I know some of your projects, a couple are ending, HumMingBird, it's a bit longer. And I'm thinking along the lines of something like a white paper, bringing together, not a very long document, but something with a number of priorities that come out of these 3 projects that bring together an exceptional number of scholars, institutions. I think it could work well as a sort of centered on improving traditional data, on how to use big data, on ethics of this or I don't know. Yeah. Sorry. Yes. My name is Kristina Markutz, and I'm the project officer overseeing HumMingBird and QuantMig, and not FUME directly, but I'm always also very familiar with FUME. At the REA, which is the Research Executive Agency, which is part of the European Commission, and we are the funding bodies. So we manage the projects on behalf of. So, I mean, it's a question.
I think my question, or maybe the comment that I'm thinking, is that whether we are the right person to talk to the policymakers directly, So I think there should be somebody in the middle. Like I'm thinking of people at the JRC who could take our research, and also they would understand what the policymakers are asking, right? So that there is somebody in between who would need to digest our things and bring it to them.
We have moderators from the GRC and other bodies, as well as I think we should have civil society too. So we have NGOs, but yes, when we think about how systematic it should be, I don't know, but I do believe in science communication. So I think we should have some people who might help us in communicating, but I think we are capable of communicating what we are really talking about. It's also in a way taking the responsibility of our own research, but that's the reason why we really try to designate or assign some moderators from the Commission or the Parliament or from the NGOs tomorrow's discussions. We have them, don't worry.
Yes, and I'm speaking for the consortium now. I think in FUME we would be very open to a joint white paper, but from your request, it sounded more like that would be on data and methods and things like that, and not directly on, okay, you should implement these and these policies, right?
Yes, I would say it has. So first of all, it's an open. It's an idea open for questioning and taking up or not, but I think it should indeed present conclusions from your project and asking yourself some policy relevant questions and how your results can answer to those questions, which can be the issue, part of the issues that were discussed today. So yes, I don't think it should be necessarily recommendations on how to improve policies, but it should really present results in a way that of course can be used, and also mentioning the different considerations about ethics of producing using data and also, but I mean, it's really up to you mostly, and we can further discuss, of course. Yeah.
I just add a couple of comments. I think that's really good advice, and thank you very much. I advocate that that's what happens, that very clear outcomes and messages, and then perhaps a reflection on the ethics of the process of knowledge production in this research policy nexus and the way in which those relations operate, and that which policymakers are very aware of anyway. But just to establish this is what, from 3 big major projects, this is a common finding, would be good.
One more.
I just wanted to ask if you could comment more and expand more on the multi-leg or multi-hopping of destinations and migration paths that was touched on earlier within and externally of the EU areas. And it's open to everyone too.
Anyone who'd like to pick up a question about the time lags in the models? I can very briefly talk about the model that Harung and we were working on. It was conceptually assuming that temporality should be in the model, not because of any kind of statistical requirements for thinking about, because we approach it from the aspirations and capabilities approach, saying that people do need time. It doesn't happen in a day. So you decide and tomorrow you get on a plane to go somewhere. It's very rare. So there is a time, but we don't know how long. And the modeling temporality is different, but I think it's a very old and traditional thing already to consider that making the decision, translating into an action already takes time. And I haven't come across to any model where they don't really consider the temporality. I mean, I don't know to what extent, you know, like it's difficult to say. I don't know what the experience with the other projects, but it is always in there for explaining. Can we explain it more? I think we can, but we have to do more. At the current stage, we just use it. Anyone else would like to talk about the time lag, temporality? Yeah.
I mean, most of the models we use are aggregate models, but we are essentially with the lags, we're talking with or without the lags, we're talking about an individual process of deciding to migrate. So there is, and in an ideal world, we would like to see how an individual perceives a policy change in the destination or origin country, or an economic change, you know, a change in the socioeconomic conditions, or perceiving the implications of any demographic change. And it would change from person to person probably. But there is, even though there's a literature that looks at those moments where it becomes very evident to everyone, like as if it's a critical juncture, but we are trying to essentially capture that individual decision-making mechanism with aggregate data, which is not ideal, but we are trying to approximate, take an average of what it takes for people to basically come with this decision or to come to an understanding of these changes. And essentially it is theory driven, but a lot of times it's also data driven. I mean, we look which lag works. We believe that there should be some lag, but sometimes we also decide on, okay, this lag seems to be more statistically significant or making more sense. I don't know. Am I revealing too much of our secrets here, or like?
Well, thank you so much. And thank you all for this very long but very informative day.